To understand the situation better, we're joined from Moscow by the narrative strategist Tatiana Kukhareva. So thank you so much for joining us, Tatiana. Sorry. As the war continues, how does Moscow currently define an acceptable end state? And has that shifted since the war's early phase?
Good evening, Tom. Well, actually, it has not. And the longer this conflict continues, the more pressing the conditions set out by President Putin actually feel, because as far as as you probably remember, the main condition, apart from obviously defending the Russian-speaking population that actually lives in the border regions, has been obtaining the neutral status for Ukraine and the non-bloc status to Ukraine, so that Russia can be sure that there will be no NATO troops on its actual front line, on its actual border. And with what we've seen so far, with the continuing saber-rattling statements coming out of the latest NATO summit, all of the statements that come from the heads of European states, I don't believe that this specific condition will ever change.
And Tatiana, what's Russia's read on Western military support to Ukraine at this stage? Is it seen as prolonging the conflict or shifting its outcome?
Well, I would say that this is actually not prolonging the conflict. The military support to Ukraine is the only reason that this conflict erupted in the first place, because as you remember, the lethal aid was supplied to Ukraine way before 2022. And it was specifically following the intensification of supplies of lethal aid into Ukraine from the US that the conflict actually erupted in February 2022. So in this respect, the continuing and still kind of, this is why all of the somehow, the statements that come out sometimes from our Western counterparts of supposedly wanting to negotiate, they kind of ring hollow, because you can't supply arms at the same rate or even intensify those supplies and still say, oh, well, you know what, maybe we'll negotiate as well.
And how is the war being felt domestically inside Russia right now, economically and in terms of public sentiment?
Well, obviously, the successes that Ukraine has had at hitting the fuel refinery outside of Moscow, and the several other successful hits have created sort of a discomfort. But this is something that, is very kind of underreported, is how adaptable the Russian population actually is in general. So there has been shortages of fuel. That situation has been tackled. The biggest problem right now were that they hit the there's this Wildberries, which is the company that basically is a retailer that sells a lot, so that their two properties have been hit, so that does create a sort of discomfort. In the meantime, does it or will it ever achieve the alleged goal, or at least what we can perceive as a goal to these attacks, to create the level of discomfort that would have the Russian population turn against this conflict and against the support of the government? I do believe that's a very weird tactic, because it's not our government that is doing this, and the Russian people are very clear on that. So I don't believe that the support, the huge support within the population for the government in this respect and the president has changed either, really.
And finally, are there any active emerging channels or for negotiation between Moscow and Kiev that you see as genuinely viable?
Well, that's a good question, Tom. Although just as we discussed today, um, because it is not Kiev that is essentially the biggest power within this conflict, because again, without the constant supply of lethal aid, without the constant supply of arms, this conflict would have never started in the first place, and it would have definitely been over by now. Then it just raises the question of any necessity for such talks. Because if there are other parties bankrolling this conflict, then obviously the goal would be to negotiate with those parties. And those negotiations are very much open and very much continuing.
Tatiana, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.